She escaped her toxic marriage and boarded a plane, unaware the person beside her was a mafia boss. She fled her toxic marriage in the middle of the night, choosing a random flight to anywhere. When the plane hit turbulence, the mysterious stranger beside her whispered, "Pretend you're with me." She thought he was being kind. She had no idea he was the city's most ruthless mafia boss. The wine glass shattered against the kitchen wall. Red liquid dripping down Aisha's cheek stung where David's hand had connected moments before, but she refused to let him see her cry. Not again. "You think you can embarrass me in front of my colleagues?" David's voice was low, dangerous. He stepped closer, his 6-foot frame towering over her. "Talking back to me at dinner like that?" Aisha pressed herself against the counter, her fingers finding the drawer handle behind her. Inside lay her passport. She'd hidden it there 3 months ago when his violence first escalated. "I wasn't talking back. I was expressing an opinion." His laugh was cruel. "Your opinion doesn't matter. You're nothing without me, Aisha. Nothing." The familiar words hit like physical blows. For 2 years, she believed them. Tonight, something inside her snapped. When David turned to pour himself another drink, Aisha silently pulled open the drawer. Her passport was still there, along with the emergency cash she'd been secretly saving. Her heart hammered as she slipped both into her jacket pocket. "I'm going to bed," she whispered. "No, you're not." David grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging into the tender flesh. "We're not done talking." Aisha looked down at his hand, then up at his flushed face. Rain pounded against the windows, matching the storm in her chest. "Yes, we are." She yanked free and ran. David's roar of rage followed her as she bolted through the front door into the Seattle night. Rain immediately soaked through her thin jacket, but she didn't stop. Her feet splashed through puddles as she ran toward the main road, her lungs burning. Behind her, she heard the front door slam open. "Aisha, get back here." A taxi's headlights cut through the darkness. Aisha waved frantically, and the car pulled over. "Airport," she gasped, sliding into the back seat. "Please hurry." The driver, an elderly man with kind eyes, glanced in the rearview mirror. "You okay, miss?" "I will be." Aisha looked back at their house, David's house. She corrected herself and saw his silhouette in the doorway. For the first time in 2 years, she was beyond his reach. At Seattle-Tacoma Airport, Aisha stood dripping at the departures board, scanning for the next flight out. Anywhere. The red numbers blurred through her tears, but one destination caught her eye. Rome, Italy. Boarding in 40 minutes. One-way ticket to Rome, she told the airline clerk, sliding her credit card across the counter with shaking fingers. "That's quite a last-minute trip," the woman observed, typing rapidly. "Any luggage to check?" Aisha glanced down at herself, soaked jacket, jeans, and the small purse containing her entire life. "Just carry on." 20 minutes later, she sat in the departure lounge, still trembling. Every time someone walked by, she flinched, expecting to see David's furious face. But he didn't know about the passport, didn't know about the cash. He probably thought she was hiding at her sister's house like last time. This time was different. This time, she wasn't coming back. The boarding call crackled over the loudspeaker. Aisha joined the line, her legs unsteady. The flight attendant smiled warmly as she scanned Aisha's boarding pass. "Seat 12B. Enjoy your flight to Rome."
Rome.
The word felt foreign on her tongue. She'd studied art history in college, had dreamed of seeing the Sistine Chapel, the Colosseum. David had promised they'd travel together after the wedding, but those promises had evaporated along with his kindness. Aisha found her seat and sank into it, finally allowing herself to breathe. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. "Excuse me." A deep, accented voice made her look up. A man stood in the aisle beside her seat, tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit despite the late hour. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and when he moved, she caught the glint of expensive cufflinks. "I believe I'm 12A, he said, gesturing to the window seat. "Oh, sorry." Aisha fumbled with her seatbelt, standing to let him pass. As he settled beside her, she caught his scent, something expensive and masculine that made her hyper-aware of her own disheveled state. She snuck a glance at him as the plane prepared for takeoff. His profile was sharp, classical, like something carved from marble. But it was his eyes that caught her attention when he briefly looked her way, dark, intelligent, and strangely intense. They lingered on her face for just a moment too long before he politely looked away. Aisha touched her cheek self-consciously, wondering if the bruise was visible. As the plane lifted off into the stormy Seattle night, she pressed her face to the window, watching the city lights fade below. With each mile, David's control over her weakened. She was free. She just didn't know yet that the man sitting beside her was about to change her definition of freedom entirely. Luca Romano had noticed the woman the moment she'd stumbled onto the plane. Her clothes were soaked, her hands shaking, and there was something in her eyes that he recognized, the hollow look of someone running from pain. He'd seen it in mirrors enough times in his youth. Now, as she stared out the window with tears silently streaming down her face, he found himself unexpectedly moved. In his world, weakness was dangerous, but there was something about her quiet desperation that felt different. Authentic. He'd boarded this flight to escape his own problems, a territory dispute in Seattle that had required his personal attention, the kind of attention that left men with choices, loyalty or a shallow grave. Now he was returning to Rome, to the family business that both defined and confined him. But the woman beside him made him forget about territories and family obligations. She made him remember what it felt like to want to protect something fragile. As the plane climbed higher into the night sky, Luca Romano, heir to one of Italy's most feared crime families, made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He would keep her safe, even if she didn't know she needed saving yet. 3 hours into the flight, Aisha finally stopped checking over her shoulder. The gentle hum of the engines and the darkened cabin created a cocoon of safety she hadn't felt in months. She'd almost convinced herself she was truly free when the plane suddenly dropped. The aircraft shuddered violently, throwing passengers against their seats. Overhead bins rattled, and somewhere behind her, someone screamed. Aisha's hands flew to her armrests, knuckles white as the plane bucked through the turbulence. Another sharp drop sent her stomach into her throat. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, the same panic response that came when David raised his voice. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the chaos, but her whole body began to shake uncontrollably. Breathe. The calm, accented voice cut through her panic. She opened her eyes to find her seatmate watching her with concern. In the dim cabin light, his dark eyes seemed almost gentle. I can't. Another violent shake cut off her words. Without hesitation, he reached over and placed his hand over hers on the armrest. His touch was warm, steady, completely different from David's painful grip. Look at me. Just breathe with me. Aisha found herself staring into his eyes as he demonstrated slow, deep breaths. Something about his presence, calm and unshakable even as the plane pitched around them, gradually steadied her racing heart. Better? He asked softly when the worst of the turbulence passed. She nodded, suddenly aware that she was still gripping his hand. As she started to pull away, his eyes caught sight of something that made his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Dark purple bruises circled her wrist where David had grabbed her. In her panic, her jacket sleeve had ridden up, exposing the marks. Luca's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Pretend you're with me. What? When we land in Zurich, stay close. Don't ask questions. Before Aisha could respond, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their approach to Zurich for the layover. She wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his tone made her trust him. 40 minutes later, as passengers filed off the plane, Luca stood and offered her his arm. Remember what I said? They walked through the jet bridge together, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, protective, not possessive. In the terminal, Aisha noticed how other travelers seemed to give them space, as if sensing something about her companion that she couldn't see. "I need to use the restroom," she whispered. "I'll wait here." Luca positioned himself where he could see both the restroom entrance and the gate area. Inside the restroom, Aisha splashed cold water on her face and stared at her reflection. Who was this man? Why was he helping her? And why did she feel safer with a complete stranger than she ever had with her own husband? When she emerged, she immediately understood why he'd told her to stay close. 3 men in dark suits stood near their gate, scanning the crowd with predatory focus. They moved with purpose, checking faces against something on a phone screen. One of them looked directly at her, and her blood turned to ice. David had found her already. Her feet froze to the spot, but then Luca was beside her, his arms sliding around her shoulders in a gesture that looked casual but felt protective. He guided her toward their gate, keeping her close to his side. "Don't look at them," he murmured against her ear. "You're safe." As they passed the men, Aisha heard one of them speak into a phone. "Negative. She's not alone. Traveling with someone." Her heart pounded, but Luca's steady presence kept her walking normally. They reached the boarding area, and he kept his arm around her until the final boarding call. "How did you know?" she asked as they settled back into their seats for the final leg to Rome. "Know what?" "That I needed." She gestured helplessly, unable to find words for what had just happened. Luca was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the Swiss Alps glowing in the pre-dawn light. "I recognized the look of someone running from something that wants to hurt them." His answer was simple, but something in his tone suggested deeper knowledge. Aisha studied his profile, the sharp cheekbones, the slight scar above his left eyebrow she hadn't noticed before, the way his expensive suit couldn't quite hide the solid strength beneath. "Thank you," she whispered. He turned to look at her then, and for just a moment, his carefully controlled expression softened. "You don't need to thank me." What Aisha didn't know was that the men in suits weren't David's hired thugs at all. They were watching Luca Romano, tracking the movements of a man whose family name was whispered in fear across 3 continents. Her abusive husband's reach barely extended beyond Seattle, but she'd unknowingly placed herself under the protection of someone far more dangerous. And far more powerful. Rome's morning sun streamed through the terminal windows as Aisha walked beside Luca toward baggage claim. After 12 hours of travel, she felt hollow, running on adrenaline and the strange comfort of his steady presence. The ancient city waited beyond these walls, her sanctuary, her fresh start. "I should probably find a taxi," she said as they approached the carousel. "Thank you for everything. I don't know how to repay." There, Luca's voice cut through her words, sharp and controlled. Aisha followed his gaze, and her stomach dropped. 2 men in cheap suits stood by the exit doors, holding a photograph. Even from a distance, she could see it was her wedding picture. The one David kept on his office desk, where she was smiling beside him in white lace and lies. "Oh God," her voice cracked. "How did he find me so fast?" The men began moving through the crowd, showing the photo to travelers, airport staff, anyone who would look. One of them spoke rapid Italian into his phone, gesturing toward their terminal. Aisha's breathing became shallow again. After everything, the desperate escape, the long flight, the hope that she'd finally broken free, David's reach had found her on another continent. She started backing away, ready to run, but had nowhere to go. Then Luca stepped in front of her. He walked toward the 2 men with casual confidence, hands in his pockets like he was strolling through a park. Aisha watched in fascination and terror as he approached them. "Scusatemi," Luca said, his Italian smooth and authoritative. The men looked up, and Aisha saw their expressions change instantly. The cocky aggression melted into something like fear. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see their body language. Luca spoke quietly, almost conversationally, while the 2 men grew increasingly nervous. One of them glanced toward her, and Luca stepped slightly to block his view. His voice remained calm, but something in his posture made the men take a step back. Within 2 minutes, they were pocketing the photograph and walking rapidly toward the exit. Luca returned to her side as if nothing had happened. "They're gone," he said simply. Aisha stared at him. "What did you tell them?" "That they were mistaken. That the woman they were looking for wasn't here. But they saw me. They knew. They knew better than to argue with me." His dark eyes met hers, and for a moment, she glimpsed something beneath the surface that made her breath catch. Not cruelty, but power. Absolute, unquestionable power. The baggage carousel started moving, breaking the spell. Luca collected a single black leather bag while Aisha stood empty-handed, still processing what she'd witnessed. "You don't have luggage," he observed. "I didn't exactly have time to pack," she managed a shaky laugh. "I should go. Find a hotel, figure out what happens next." "The airport isn't safe anymore," Luca's voice was matter-of-fact. "They'll be watching, waiting for you to leave alone." Aisha looked around the terminal, suddenly seeing threats everywhere. "Then what am I supposed to do? Hide here forever?" "Come with me." The offer hung between them. Aisha studied his face, searching for hidden motives, manipulation, the warning signs she'd learned to recognize with David. But all she saw was calm certainty. "I don't even know your name," she whispered. "Luca Romano." He extended his hand formally. "And you are?" "Aisha." She took his hand, noting again how different his touch felt from David's, strong without being forceful. "Aisha Clark." "It's a pleasure to meet you properly, Aisha Clark." Outside the terminal, a sleek black sedan waited at the curb. The driver, a compact man with alert eyes, stepped out to open the door. He nodded respectfully to Luca and gave Aisha a assessing but not unfriendly look. "Marco, this is Aisha. She'll be staying in the city for a while." Marco's expression didn't change, but Aisha caught the slight nod of understanding. She slid into the leather interior, inhaling the scent of expensive cologne and something else, something that spoke of money and power. As they pulled into Roman traffic, Luca sat beside her in comfortable silence. Aisha watched the ancient city unfold through tinted windows, crumbling ruins standing next to modern cafes, narrow streets echoing with centuries of history. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally. Luca was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. "You look like someone who deserves freedom." Such simple words, but they hit her like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had thought she deserved anything good? "I'm not sure I know what freedom looks like anymore," she admitted. Luca turned to study her profile as she gazed out at Rome. "Then perhaps it's time you learned." The car glided through the eternal city, while Aisha sat beside a man whose name had just made two grown men flee in terror. She should be afraid. Every instinct screamed that she was trading one dangerous situation for another. But as Luca Romano's protection wrapped around her like armor, Aisha felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the possibility of hope. The car wound through Rome's labyrinthine streets, past fountains where coins glinted in afternoon sunlight and cafes where locals gestured animatedly over espresso. Aisha pressed her face to the window, drinking in the beauty of a city she'd only seen in textbooks. "It's incredible," she murmured, watching an elderly woman hanging laundry from a window above a bakery that probably existed when Michelangelo walked these same stones. "You've never been to Italy before?" Luca asked. "I've never been anywhere before." The admission slipped out before she could stop it. David said traveling was too expensive, too dangerous. Said I wouldn't appreciate it anyway. She felt Luca's gaze on her, but didn't turn from the window. Saying David's name aloud felt like summoning a demon. "And what did you want to see?" His voice was carefully neutral. "Everything." The word came out fierce, surprising them both. "The Sistine Chapel, the Colosseum, the Pantheon. I studied art history in college before," she trailed off. "Before what?" "Before I met David. He said my degree was useless, that I should focus on being a good wife instead." She finally looked at Luca. "I haven't touched an art book in 2 years. Something flickered in his dark eyes. Anger, she realized. Not at her, but for her. The car slowed, turning into a narrow street lined with honey-colored buildings. Marco parked outside a small pensione with flower boxes beneath its windows. "This is where you'll stay," Luca said as Marco opened her door. Aisha stepped onto the cobblestones, breathing in the scent of jasmine and fresh bread. "It's perfect. Maria runs this place." Luca paused, choosing his words carefully. "Discreet. You'll be safe here." He walked with her to the entrance, where a woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes emerged. She spoke rapid Italian with Luca, glancing occasionally at Aisha with maternal concern. "Maria doesn't speak much English," Luca translated, "but she says you're welcome here as long as you need. Tell her thank you. For everything." Luca relayed the message, and Maria beamed, taking Aisha's hands in hers and patting them gently. "She says you have sad eyes but a strong spirit," Luca said. "She's rarely wrong about these things." As Maria led them inside, Aisha marveled at the cozy interior, worn wooden floors, religious paintings on whitewashed walls, the smell of garlic and herbs drifting from the kitchen. "The room is upstairs," Luca said. "Maria will show you." But as they reached the staircase, Aisha turned back. "Luca, I don't have any money for this. I can't pay. It's handled. I can't let you." "Aisha," he stepped closer, and she caught that expensive scent again, now mixed with something uniquely him. "Let me help you. Please." The word please from a man who clearly wasn't accustomed to asking for anything undid her protests. She nodded, following Maria upstairs to a small but beautiful room with windows overlooking a courtyard where lemon trees grew in ceramic pots. When she came back downstairs, Luca was waiting in the small lobby. "I should go," he said, but made no move toward the door. "Will I see you again?" The question tumbled out before she could stop it. "Do you want to?" The honest answer was yes, which terrified her. She'd fled one man's control only to find herself drawn to another whose power dwarfed David's completely. But where David's strength had been used to diminish her, Luca's seemed designed to shield her. "I don't know what I want anymore," she admitted. "Then take time to figure it out." He pulled a business card from his jacket, writing something on the back. "This is my number. If you need anything at all, call me." She took the card, noting the expensive paper, the elegant script that simply read L. Romano with a phone number. On the back, he'd written Aisha in careful letters, as if her name mattered. "What kind of business are you in?" she asked, studying the card. "Import and export," he said smoothly. "Family business." It was clearly a rehearsed answer, one that revealed nothing. But as he turned to leave, she caught sight of Marco speaking quietly into his phone by the car, his eyes constantly scanning the street.
"Luca."
He paused at the door. "Those men at the airport, they were afraid of you. Really afraid." He was still for a long moment, his back to her. "Yes. Should I be afraid of you too?" When he turned, his expression was unguarded for just an instant, and she saw something that looked like pain. "I hope not," he said quietly. "But Aisha." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "In my world, fear keeps people alive. The men who were looking for you understand that. Your husband's reach ends where mine begins." "And where does yours end?" A smile ghosted across his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It doesn't." He left her standing in the pensione doorway, Marco's car disappearing into the maze of Roman streets. Aisha looked down at the business card in her hand, realizing she'd just accepted protection from a man whose power had no limits. For the first time since fleeing Seattle, she wondered if she'd escaped one cage only to find herself in another, one lined with silk instead of thorns, but a cage nonetheless. 3 days in Rome had begun to heal something broken inside Aisha. She woke each morning to Maria's gentle knocking and the smell of fresh cornetti, spent her afternoons wandering cobblestone streets with a guidebook Maria had given her, and fell asleep to the sound of fountain water and distant laughter. For the first time in years, she felt like herself again. On Tuesday, she discovered a small cafe near the Pantheon where she could sit with a cappuccino and sketch the ancient architecture. Her art professor's voice echoed in her memory as she drew the classical columns. Art isn't just decoration, Aisha. It's how humans make sense of beauty in a broken world. David had called her sketching a waste of time. Now, with charcoal moving across paper, she remembered why she'd fallen in love with it. Bellissimo, said a voice behind her. Aisha turned to find Lucas standing by her table, immaculate as always in a navy suit that probably cost more than her old monthly salary. Her heart did something complicated at the sight of him. You followed me here, she said, closing her sketchbook. I happened to be in the neighborhood. He gestured to the chair across from her. May I? She nodded, and he sat, ordering an espresso in rapid Italian. The waiter's deference was immediate and absolute, the kind of respect money alone couldn't buy. How did you know I'd be here? She asked. Luca was quiet for a moment, stirring sugar into his coffee. I wanted to make sure you were safe. That's not an answer. No, it's not, he met her eyes directly. The truth is, I've had someone keeping watch. At a distance. You wouldn't have noticed. Aisha felt a chill despite the warm afternoon sun. You've been having me followed, protected, without asking me. Yes. His honesty was somehow worse than a lie would have been. So, I'm not really free at all, am I? I'm just in a prettier prison. Aisha. No. She stood abruptly, gathering her things. I thought you were different. I thought. She stopped, realizing she'd been about to say she thought she could trust him. Lucas stood as well, dropping money on the table. Too much money, she noticed. Walk with me. Please. Against her better judgment, she did. They strolled through the piazza, past tourists taking photos and vendors selling postcards. Your husband contacted the American embassy yesterday, Lucas said quietly. Aisha stopped walking. What? He filed a missing person report. Claims you're mentally unstable, possibly dangerous to yourself. He's requesting Italian authorities assist in bringing you home. The blood drained from her face. Can he do that? He's trying. He's hired a local lawyer, someone with connections in the police. Luca's jaw tightened. Someone who doesn't understand that you're under my protection. Your protection that I didn't ask for. Would you rather face this alone? The question hung between them as they walked. Aisha wanted to say yes, wanted to claim her independence, but the thought of David's reach extending even here made her stomach twist. Why? She asked instead. Why do you care what happens to me? Lucas stopped beside a fountain where coins glittered underwater, wishes made by strangers who believed in better tomorrows. When I was 12, my father brought home a woman. She was beautiful, terrified, covered in bruises her husband had left. His voice was carefully controlled. She stayed with us for 3 days. On the 4th morning, she was gone. Went back to him. What happened to her? He killed her 2 weeks later. Aisha's breath caught.
Luca.
I swore that day that if I ever had the power to stop such things, I would. He turned to face her fully. I have that power now. They stood in silence, the weight of his confession settling between them. Around them, Rome continued its eternal dance. Lovers met for secret lunches, children chased pigeons, old men argued about soccer over wine. I saw you again yesterday, Aisha said suddenly. Where? At the bookstore near the Spanish Steps. And the day before, at the market in Trastevere. She studied his face. It wasn't coincidence, was it? No. Are you watching me, or are you watching for threats to me? Both. His brutal honesty was becoming a pattern. Aisha found she preferred it to David's constant lies, even when the truth was uncomfortable. Show me, she said. Show you what? Your world. The one where you have all this power, she gestured around them. I want to understand what I'm really accepting when I accept your protection. Luca's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his features. Aisha, that's not. I'm tired of being kept in the dark about my own life, she said firmly. David treated me like a child who couldn't handle reality. Don't you do the same? For a long moment, Luca studied her face. Then slowly he nodded.
Tonight, he said.
I'll show you tonight. As they parted ways, him returning to whatever mysterious business occupied his days, her walking back to the pensione. Aisha wondered if she'd just made the bravest decision of her life, or the most foolish. But for the first time since leaving Seattle, she was choosing her path with open eyes. At 10 o'clock that night, Marco arrived at the pensione in a different car, sleek, black, with windows so dark they seemed to absorb light. Aisha had changed into the only dress she owned, a simple black one she'd bought that afternoon with money from her dwindling emergency fund. "Signora," Marco said with a respectful nod, opening the door. The drive took them away from tourist Rome into neighborhoods where ancient stones gave way to modern glass and steel. They pulled into an underground garage beneath a building that looked like a fortress disguised as an office complex. Luca waited by a private elevator, devastating in a black suit that seemed to emphasize the dangerous edge she'd only glimpsed before. His eyes swept over her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Where are we going?" "Upstairs. To a meeting." The elevator rose silently to the top floor, opening into a hallway lined with oil paintings that probably belonged in museums. At the end, heavy double doors opened into a room that took Aisha's breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Rome's glittering skyline. The space was elegant but unmistakably masculine. Leather furniture, dark wood, bookshelves filled with volumes in multiple languages. A bar dominated one corner, crystal decanters catching the city lights. But it was the men in the room that made her understand where she truly was. 8 men in expensive suits sat around a massive table, their conversation halting as she entered. They were older than Luca, weathered faces marked by years of decisions most people never had to make. When they looked at her, their eyes held calculation, assessment, and something like surprise. "Gentlemen," Luca said in English, his hand resting lightly on Aisha's back. "This is Aisha." The introductions were formal, first names only: Antonio, Giuseppe, Franco. Each man stood to greet her with old-world courtesy, but she could feel the weight of their scrutiny. "Please sit," Luca said, guiding her to a chair beside his at the head of the table. For the next hour, Aisha listened to a conversation that was part business meeting, part chess match. They spoke in careful euphemisms about territories and arrangements, about problems that needed to be resolved, but underneath the polite language, she began to understand what she was witnessing. These men controlled things. People. Money. They spoke of politicians like pawns, of businesses like personal property. When they mentioned names, other men nodded with the respect reserved for those who could end careers with a phone call. And at the center of it all sat Luca, younger than most but clearly holding authority that went beyond age. When he spoke, everyone listened. When he made decisions, no one questioned them. "The Seattle situation is resolved," Antonio reported at one point, and Aisha's blood chilled as she realized they were talking about David's hired men. "Good," Luca said simply. "And the other matter?" "The embassy request has been discouraged. The lawyer in question has decided to pursue other cases." Aisha's hands trembled in her lap. This was what Luca's protection looked like: strings pulled, pressure applied, problems disappearing because he willed them to disappear. As the meeting concluded and the men began to leave, each stopped to speak quietly with Luca. Some glanced at her with curious respect, others with poorly concealed concern. She caught fragments: careful, complications, the old man won't approve. When they were alone, Luca poured himself a scotch and stood by the windows, Rome spread below him like a kingdom. "Now you've seen it," he said without turning around. "This is what you are, it wasn't a question." "Yes. And these men, they work for you?" "With me. My family has influence in this city. In many cities." Aisha stood, walking to join him at the window. "Your family? You mean the Mafia?" The word hung in the air between them, ugly and final. "We prefer other terms," Luca said quietly. "But yes. So when you protected me from David's men, when you made problems disappear, She turned to face him. You're not just wealthy. You're dangerous. Yes, he set down his glass, finally meeting her eyes. I told you that fear keeps people alive in my world. I should have been clearer. I'm often the thing they fear. The confession should have terrified her. Instead, Aisha found herself studying his face, seeing past the power to the man who'd held her hand during turbulence, who'd spoken of a murdered woman with pain in his voice. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because you asked for the truth. And because he stepped closer, close enough that she could see the conflict in his dark eyes. Because I need you to understand what you're choosing. If you stay under my protection, you're not just accepting help. You're entering my world. And if I don't, then you face David's reach and whatever other threats find you. Alone. Aisha looked out at Rome, the eternal city that had seen empires rise and fall, that had witnessed every form of human power and corruption. Somewhere out there, David was pulling strings, trying to drag her back into his cage of control and violence. But here, in this room that reeked of power and danger, stood a man whose cage was lined with silk and gold, and whose bars might be stronger than any she'd known. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course, Luca's voice was carefully neutral. Marco will take you back. As she reached the door, she turned back.
Luca?
That woman you told me about, the one your father tried to help. Yes. Do you think she would have lived if she'd stayed? His answer followed her all the way back to the pensione. I don't know, but she would have lived differently. Aisha spent 2 sleepless nights wrestling with Luca's revelation. She walked Rome's ancient streets, sat in churches where centuries of desperate souls had sought sanctuary, and tried to imagine a future that didn't involve choosing between 2 different forms of captivity. On the 3rd morning, her choice was made for her. She was returning from the market with fresh bread when she saw him. David stood in the pensione's small lobby, his American bulk incongruous among the delicate Italian furnishings. He wore his best suit, the charcoal one he saved for important business meetings, and his smile was the practiced one he used to charm clients. But Aisha saw the rage burning beneath it. Hello, sweetheart, he said, his voice carrying the false warmth she knew preceded his worst violence. Did you really think you could run from me? Maria stood behind the reception desk, her face pale with confusion and fear. She'd obviously let him in, not understanding the danger. David, Aisha's voice came out steadier than she felt. How did you find me? I told you I had connections. He stepped closer, and she caught the familiar smell of his expensive cologne mixed with the whiskey he'd been drinking to fuel his courage. The Italian police were very helpful once I explained the situation. My poor, unstable wife, fleeing in the middle of the night, probably in danger to herself. I'm not going back with you. David's smile twisted into something ugly. Yes, you are. I have a medical evaluation that says you're having a psychotic break. The authorities are prepared to have you committed for your own safety if you don't come quietly. Aisha's blood turned to ice. Of course, he'd found a way to use the system against her. David was nothing if not thorough in his cruelty. You can't force me. I can do whatever I want. His mask slipped completely now, revealing the monster she'd lived with for 2 years. You're my wife. You belong to me. He grabbed her arm, his fingers finding the exact spot where his old bruises had just begun to fade. Aisha cried out, and Maria started forward, speaking rapid Italian in distress. Shut up, old woman, David snarled, shoving Maria aside. She stumbled, hitting the desk hard. That's when Aisha saw them. 2 men in dark suits entered the lobby with predatory quiet. But these weren't David's hired thugs. She recognized the sharp alertness, the expensive tailoring, the way they moved like shadows made flesh. Luca's men. David saw them too, his grip on Aisha's arm tightening. I don't know who you think you are, but this is a family matter. This woman is coming with me. The larger of the 2 men spoke in accented English. I think not. I have legal authority. You have nothing. Luca's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He stood in the doorway, somehow making the small lobby feel even smaller with his presence. He wasn't wearing a suit this time. Dark jeans and a black sweater that emphasized the dangerous grace of his movements. David's face went through several expressions: confusion, recognition, fear, then desperate anger. "You're the man from the plane?" "I am." "Well, this doesn't concern you. Aisha is my wife, and she's coming home with me." Lucas stepped into the lobby, his men flanking him. The space suddenly felt charged with violence barely held in check. "Take your hands off her," Lucas said quietly. "Or what? You'll call the police?" David laughed, but it was shaky now. "I told you I have legal backing. They're on my side." "No," Lucas said, moving closer. "They're not." He pulled out his phone, dialing a number. He spoke briefly in Italian, then handed the phone to David. "Detective Ricci would like to speak with you." David took the phone with obvious reluctance. Aisha watched his face change as he listened, confidence crumbling into confusion, then fear. "But you said I was told." David's voice became shrill. "What do you mean the paperwork was rejected?" "I had assurances." Luca took the phone back. "Your Italian lawyer has withdrawn from your case. The medical evaluation has been deemed fraudulent. The embassy has been informed that Mrs. Clark is here of her own free will under the protection of respected local citizens." "You can't do this," David whispered. "I already have." For a moment, David looked lost, a small man whose carefully constructed reality was collapsing. Then his desperation turned vicious. "Fine," he snarled, spinning back to Aisha. "If I can't have you, maybe no one should." His hand went inside his jacket, and Aisha saw the glint of metal. She'd never known he carried a gun, but she realized David had planned for this possibility. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. Luca moved like water, flowing around David's clumsy draw. There was a sharp crack, David's cry of pain, and the gun clattered across the floor. David was on his knees, his arm bent at an unnatural angle, whimpering. "You broke my wrist," he gasped. "Be grateful it wasn't your neck," Lucas said conversationally. He gestured to his men. "Escort Mr. Clark to the airport. Make sure he understands that Italy is no longer safe for him." As they hauled David to his feet, he looked back at Aisha with pure hatred. "This isn't over. I'll find another way." "No," Lucas said with absolute certainty. "You won't." After they left, the lobby fell silent except for Maria's shaky breathing. Luca helped the older woman to a chair, speaking to her in gentle Italian until her color returned. Then he turned to Aisha. "Are you hurt?" She looked down at her arm where David's fingers had dug in, already seeing new bruises forming over the old ones. "I'm okay." "No, you're not," his voice was soft. "But you will be." Aisha stared at the spot where her husband had knelt in broken defeat. For 2 years, David had been the monster in her nightmares, the inescapable force that controlled every aspect of her life. Luca had made him disappear in less than 5 minutes. "You said I'd never be truly free if I kept running," she said quietly. "You said I needed to decide where I stand." "Yes." She looked up at him. This dangerous man who'd just shattered her past with the same casual efficiency he'd used to order coffee. "I've decided." The next morning, Aisha stood on the Ponte Sant'Angelo as the sun painted Rome in shades of gold and amber. The Tiber flowed beneath her feet, ancient waters that had witnessed the rise and fall of emperors, the birth and death of dreams. She'd been there for an hour, watching the city wake up. Street vendors arranged their wares. Early commuters hurried past with espresso and purpose, and the eternal dance of Roman life continued as it had for millennia. Behind her, she heard familiar footsteps on stone. "I thought I might find you here," Lucas said quietly. She didn't turn around. "How did you know?" "You mentioned wanting to see everything Rome had to offer. This bridge appears in every guidebook." He moved to stand beside her at the railing, careful to maintain distance. "Also, Marco may have mentioned which direction you walked when you left the pensione. Still watching me, still protecting you." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher over the ancient city. Aisha could feel the weight of decision pressing against her chest like a physical thing. David's plane left 2 hours ago, Lucas said eventually. Will he try again? No, the certainty in Luca's voice was absolute. His accounts have been frozen pending investigation into fraudulent medical documents. His law firm has dropped him as a partner. His reputation is damaged beyond repair. Aisha absorbed this, realizing that David's destruction was as thorough as his control had once seemed complete. You did all that overnight. I made some calls. She finally turned to look at him. In the morning light, he seemed different, younger somehow, less controlled. His hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd run his hands through it, and she could see the exhaustion around his eyes. Did you sleep at all? She asked. No. Why not? Luca was quiet for a long moment, his hands gripping the stone railing. Because I was afraid you'd disappear while I wasn't watching. Like she did. The vulnerable admission hung between them. Aisha studied his profile, seeing past the dangerous reputation to the 12-year-old boy who'd watched his father fail to save someone who mattered. I'm not her, she said softly. I know. And I'm not David's victim anymore. No, you're not. She turned back to the river, gathering courage for what she needed to say. But I could become yours. Luca went very still. Aisha, your world is beautiful and terrible, she continued. You have power that David could never imagine. You can make problems disappear, control outcomes, bend reality to your will. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But power like that doesn't share well. What are you saying? I'm saying that if I stay with you, I'll never know if my choices are really mine. Will I love you because I choose to, or because you've removed every other option? Will I be happy because I want to be, or because you've eliminated everything that could make me sad? The question settled between them like a physical weight. Below, the Tiber continued its ancient flow, indifferent to human struggles. You think I would manipulate you, Lucas said finally. I think you would protect me from everything, including my own mistakes. And maybe that's not the same thing as being free. Luca turned to face her fully. What if I promised? Don't, Aisha held up her hand. Don't make promises you might not be able to keep. Your instinct is to control what threatens the people you care about. It's who you are. Asking you to change that would be like asking the river to flow uphill. They stared at each other as the city came alive around them. Aisha could see the pain in his dark eyes, the recognition that she was right. So what happens now? He asked. Aisha reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, thick, expensive paper with the Pensione's letterhead. I wrote you a letter, she said, holding it out to him. Don't read it now. Read it tonight, when you're alone. Luca took the envelope, his fingers brushing hers. Will you tell me what it says? It says thank you. For saving me, for showing me that I'm worth saving, for proving that not all powerful men use their strength to hurt. She paused. And it says goodbye. Aisha. I'm leaving Rome today. I don't know where I'm going yet, but I need to find out who I am when no one is protecting me. When no one is controlling me. She smiled through tears she hadn't realized were falling. I need to learn how to save myself. Luca nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. And after? When you've found yourself? I don't know. Maybe I'll come back. Maybe I'll write. Maybe I'll just carry the memory of a man who taught me that strength doesn't have to mean cruelty. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek, breathing in his familiar scent one last time. Be careful, Luca Romano. The world needs men like you. Even if women like me can't stay in your shadow. She walked away without looking back, leaving him standing alone on the bridge as Rome awakened around them. In her pocket was a train ticket to Florence, the first destination she'd chosen purely for herself, because she wanted to see Michelangelo's David and remember what it meant to be carved from stone but still reach toward heaven. Behind her, Luca watched until she disappeared into the crowd, her letter pressed against his chest like a promise or a wound. He didn't follow her. For the first time in his life, he let someone he cared about walk away. And somehow, that felt like love. 3 months later, a postcard arrived at his office, a reproduction of the Sistine Chapel ceiling. On the back, in familiar handwriting, "Learning to paint again. Learning to fly. Thank you for teaching me the difference." Luca kept it in his desk drawer, next to her letter, and waited.